All right, this is August 21st. Brendan Ames interviewing Tom Brislin of Kansas. Tom, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
All right. First, I'd like to start with Kansas a little bit. You guys have just welcomed a new member in place of Rick. Uh, what can you tell us about that?
Scott Bernard has just been announced as our newest full-time band member. Richard Williams is still staying on, but in his words, he's slowing down a little bit. He's gonna do fewer shows, but he's still very much a part of the band. But Scott will be there all the time now, and we've had Scott on a few shows this year, and it's really great to have him on board.
What is it like playing with a new guitarist? Is it any different from any other Kansas show you've done?
Every musician has their own feel, their own tone, and even in the context of this music, where most of the parts that we all play have come before us, it's just natural that the way you play is going to have a certain feel to it. So Richard has his own musical identity and his sound, his musical voice on guitar, and Scott has something that's his own, and yet it's still very much Kansas when he plays. So it's a lot of fun having him on board.
You guys just got off tour with 38 Special. How was that?
Oh, those guys are great. We love playing with them, and we hope to do some more soon.
What do you think you do as the biggest impact in Kansas as a member?
Well, I would say since 2023, I've been the band's music director.
Mm.
So that kind of came about when we were making our comeback after the COVID shutdown. And in 2022, we were ready to rock. We were starting to get back into a full swing of things, but people were having to miss shows from time to time, and we kept getting shut down. So Phil Ehart, the band's longtime drummer and manager, and Richard, they thought we should really get some backup options so we don't have to stop. So we'll always be able to play. And to help facilitate that, they knew that I had experience as a music director. I had my own band for years called Spiraling, and I was also Debbie Harry's music director and a few other acts on tour. So they knew that I would be able to facilitate if we ever had to have a musician fill in for anybody, and also see the band through to the next tour, which was the 50th anniversary tour. So that's been my role ever since, and it means I run the rehearsals and help listen for anything that we should be doing, but everybody's pretty self-sufficient in this group.
What all goes into making a Kansas set list? How much you guys have an impact on what songs get chosen?
Well, that's something that Phil Ehart really loves to do. It's always been his one of the things he really enjoys about planning for a Kansas tour. So he will have a big impact on that. Um, when I first joined, the whole first year of being in the band, it was like just kind of I don't want to say keeping my mouth shut, but really just, playing my part and learning as much as I could about the group and how everybody works. Once I got more experience with the group, then and building trust with the guys, I could say, "Hey, what do you think about doing this song this year?" And um, but a lot of times we're on the same page, and
Mhm.
everything. Oh, I was thinking about that song. So uh, it's not a total committee thing. It really does boil down to what Phil and Rich want to see
Mhm.
going on in the tour.
Going back to the beginning, how did you first get exposed to your instrument and music?
There's piano in the house, and I recall banging on that thing since I was like 2 or 3 years old. Musical family. My parents loved music. Father was a good singer, and my siblings. I have an older brother, and I had three sisters, and everybody was either a musician or had great record collection. And I just gravitated toward it immediately. And from the time I was like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old, I wanted to be in a rock band.
Who were some of your early influences earlier in your life?
Well, that one of the first albums I really remember listening to was the first Foreigner album,
Mm.
and that was, the 70s rock that I was exposed to. And I recently met Al Greenwood, who was the
Oh
keyboard
wow.
player on that album, and he was one of my first influences because those keyboard sounds were like,
Yeah.
oh, I can do that, not just the piano. Then when I discovered the radio for myself coming up in the 80s, it was like the new wave and just the 80s explosion of music from the Police and Men at Work to Duran Duran to Prince. And a lot of that music was the stuff that I was discovering for myself on the
Mhm.
radio. And then when I got into playing and really getting into being a musician, that's when the prog stuff started coming around. I'd always heard Yes
Yeah.
since I was very little, and I was always a big fan. But when I was a teenager and was in high school and we were forming bands, that was just something I wanted to play, like Yes music and Keith Emerson and Emerson, Lake
Yeah.
and Palmer and Genesis, Gentle Giant, King Crimson, all that stuff started coming into play, as well as jazz.
Yeah.
That was a big interest of mine because I was taking piano lessons, doing the classical thing and the pop thing, and getting into jazz. I was just always had the smorgasbord of music that I was into.
So would you say you were into progressive rock and then went into jazz?
Yeah, that I think I was really falling in love with both of those kinds of music, I would say simultaneously.
At what age did you form your first band, and then what age did you like finally professional, like start playing professionally?
My friends and I started a band when we were 10 years old. We were awesome. Everyone just came to my house because I had the piano, and we
Mhm.
didn't really have much in the way of equipment. It was one of the girls had a guitar and acoustic guitar, and we had like a pots and pans and things like that we were hitting for drums, and that was our first attempt. And then not too long after, about 12, 13 years old, some friends of mine and I started, in earnest to try to form a band, and it was just this uh, long road of like trying to save up enough money to buy a keyboard, and but I was hooked from there. I would say from the time I was almost 13 years old until now, I've been in a steady stream of bands and musical projects. I never looked back. I just always knew that that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah. Did you pursue music in school at all?
Oh yeah. And in high school, it was like any excuse to play music. And everything I wanted to do had to do with music. If I had to write a paper for English class or something, I wanted to write a paper about Keith Emerson or about the history of the synthesizer or something. I was always trying to shoehorn music into everything I did. And of course, did all the bands at school, had my own rock band, had a jazz band at school of my own, and went to music college. And even when I was out of class, I was trying to get gigs or find people to jam with or start a band or join a band. It was I look back and say, how did I have the personal bandwidth to do all that? It was like,
Yeah.
well, it was life before the internet, really. That's how it was.
Can you read music? Did you learn how to read
Yeah.
music? Yeah.
Yeah, my sisters were my first piano teachers when I was around
Mhm.
6 or 7 years old, and they started me off on those little red primer books that a lot of kids get when they first learn piano lessons. And so I learned how to read the staff, and then about a year later, I went to piano lessons with the local music teacher in town where I grew up in New Jersey in a town called Denellen, and her name's Anita DeStorbo, and she had a class. It was like 5 kids in a piano class. And what was interesting was that she was teaching from this method that sort of eased kids into reading music. So I had all these icons and graphics and things, and I was really confused by it because I had already started learning the traditional music notation, but in a way it gave me a head start. The other thing was that I was also simultaneously learning how to play by ear
Mhm.
because I loved a lot of TV theme songs and pop songs, and I would always try to figure them out. And I was even trying to come up with my own music at that time too.
When you had bands, were you writing your own material or
Yeah,
were you making covers?
the first bands that I was in and had, we were going for originals right away.
Mhm.
The idea of doing cover songs didn't even occur to me until a little bit later. Um, in fact, my first gig I ever did was with like a synth band. We were in the vein of like a Depeche Mode or New Order kind of thing. And we had instrumentals and originals and maybe two covers in the set. But we were, we played a battle of the bands and it didn't go over great because nobody knew what we were playing and we it was the first time we ever tried playing in public anyway, so you had to start somewhere. Um, then I went back to the drawing board and started learning some other bands' tunes, and from then on it was like if I ever started a band or joined a band, we would we'd pick a few songs from the bands that we were influenced by
Mhm.
to start off with, and then from there we would get into our writing.
Mhm. How were you first recognized by Yes and asked to join them for their Symphonic Yes tour?
Well, it goes back a few instances to when I first graduated college. I was even like I was saying, when I was in college, I was like, pick up the bat phone. Where do you want me to play? I'll play an Italian restaurant. Okay, I play a church. Okay, play an art gallery. Okay, you want a street fair? Okay, I'll put a band together for that. And I was just had this really intense drive to just play everywhere and learn as much as I could about any kind of style of music. Played in a wedding band, and and at the same time I had an original group. So it was like we were just totally going for it. And I bring this all up again because shortly after I graduated from university, I was picked up by Glenn Burtnick, who is a singer-songwriter from New Jersey who played with Styx and Beatlemania, and he and had several hits of his own. And I got picked up by his band. And a couple of years into that, he referred me to Kazim Sultan, who was musical
Uh,
director for Meatloaf.
and he was in Utopia with Rundgren.
That, yeah, one and the same. So uh, I auditioned for Meatloaf's band and got that gig when I was about 24 years old. And so that was like in being in the hot seat because the piano was very central to Meatloaf's whole music and his
Mhm.
whole show. So I worked with Meatloaf for a few years, and he had the same managers as Yes.
Mhm.
And I remember telling them that I grew up on Yes Music, and if they ever needed somebody to fill in for them, I was like, "What am I saying?" Um, and it was even, I think, at a time when Igor Korshev was playing keys for them.
Mhm.
I think they wanted to play in Russia, but he couldn't go back because I think he had defected to the United States, right? Um, and I was like, I'll fill in. I'll go and play 5 shows with Yes and be your super sub. And that was the pitch that I had. And they're like, okay, start making a tape. This was the managers, by the way. Um, and not long after that, they came to me and said, plans have changed. Um, Igor's no longer working with the band. Rick Wakeman is on a tour of his own and will be returning the following year. But we want someone this year. We were going to tour with an orchestra instead of keyboards. But then we were thinking, well, let's add piano and organ to the orchestra. Would you be interested? And I said, yeah. And then it just, before I even met the guys, John Anderson had called me and said, I want everything. I want all the keys of Yes. And I hear you sing too, so I want harmony vocals, which is something that a keyboard player in Yes wasn't always called upon to do, rarely. And so it was make a recording. They sent me 2 songs, a live recording of 2 songs, Close to the Edge and The Gates of Delirium, two 20-plus minute songs. And they had me record keys along with it in a way where they could, the left speaker would be the reference recording and the right speaker would be what I played. So they could listen to just what I'm doing or what I'm doing with the recording of the band. So I did Close to the Edge and Gates of Delirium, learned it up, and the advantage I had was that I've been like listening to this music like crazy since as long as I could remember. So it wasn't like I was learning some unfamiliar stuff. I
Mhm.
had to dig into the nitty-gritty because there's a lot of detail in that music. But I set up all the keyboards I had and tried to approximate the sounds and from that recording they invited me to meet them while they were recording the Magnification album in California. I was actually doing a Meatloaf album at that time as well, and that came out a couple years later called Couldn't Have Said It Better. I went over to the Yes session, met the guys, and got along well with them, and they chose me for the symphonic tour.
And what were your thoughts on the tour? Did you have a fun time on that?
Oh yeah, I mean it was surreal in a way because like I said, this was the band I had the posters up on the wall when I was a kid. Fortunately for me, having that world touring experience with Meatloaf under my belt
Mhm.
had kind of rid me of any of that fanboy, starstruck kind of thing. I was in the pro scene by then, so I knew what the job entailed and got down to business with it. But I remember standing at my station, looking around and seeing Alan White there, and seeing Steve Howe in front of me, and looking across, seeing John and Chris, and just thinking, this feels like virtual reality. You know, like play with your favorite band, yeah, and playing the deep '70s music too. Was like, which was something because once I decided that I wanted to be a professional musician and I was way into prog rock, everybody was saying prog rock is not in style. Like, do not play prog rock. That is old news. No one likes that. You gotta be, whatever it was current at the time. Was it either if it was hair bands or grunge or whatever. And lo and behold, I'm playing Gates of Delirium and Ritual and You and I with this group that meant so much to me. So it was pretty wild, and I knew that it was finite. I knew that once it was just for that tour, so I was going to live it up and play my heart out and do the best job that I could.
Now on that tour, you guys did "Owner of a Lonely Heart," and you did the solo on that. Uh, why did you do the solo instead of Steve?
Because he didn't want to play the song. In fact, in North America on the symphonic tour, we did not play "Owner of a Lonely Heart."
Mhm.
Um, we did Wondrous Stories for a few shows. Not a lot of people know that because I didn't make it to the European leg where we recorded the DVD. But once we did get to Europe and we knew that the DVD recording was looming, the producers of the video were saying, you have to play your biggest hit song. But Steve Howe was never into playing the song,
Yeah.
and we were getting away with not doing it up until this point. So he was not into it. And one day, Chris Squire came up to me and told me the situation that they want to play Owner of the Lonely Heart. Steve doesn't want to do it. And he asked me if I would go talk to Steve about it because I get along with him well. And I'm thinking, you really want what am I gonna do? I'm just the guy, who you got on keys for this one tour, and I've been playing with the band for 3 months, and so I gave it a shot, and I went and spoke with him, and I said, hey, the guys are talking about playing Owner of a Lonely Heart, and he just smiled and knew that they sent me right from the get-go. And he explained to me that he just didn't think that people would want to hear the way he played that song because he plays in such a different style from Trevor Rabin. And so off the cuff, I suggested that I play Trevor Rabin's guitar solo on a synthesizer and kind of let him off the hook for that. And he thought about it for a second and said, okay, I'll do it. And so then I had to figure that out and then work it out. But it was really my idea and it worked.
Yeah.
So that's why we have that song on the DVD.
Now, I believe the symphonic tour ended in New York just a few days before 9/11, and you guys actually left New York on the 10th of September 2001.
Yeah, the Radio City Music Hall was on September 8th,
Hmm.
Saturday. And I lived in New Jersey, so I could just go home. I think I might have, taken a taxi or a train or something, but I think I might have stayed overnight and gone home on the Sunday the 9th. And I remembered that my band, which was then called You Were Spiraling, had an upcoming show in New York later in September at a venue called Mercury Lounge, which is still there. And I remember having flyers for the show, and I thought, oh, maybe the Yes fans will want to come see me play with my modern rock band. And I remember that, but so I put some flyers out, went home, and it was going to be about a month and a half until we went to Europe. And I was actually recording an album with You Were Spiraling right before the Yes tour started. So I thought I would just resume that for a few weeks and then get back with Yes and do the European leg of the tour. And then 9/11 happened. I was in New Jersey, um, but I could see the aftermath from where I lived. So it was very harrowing. And I will tell you that a lot of us were really nervous about traveling after that, as anyone were, because it was October that we went to Vienna
Hmm.
to begin rehearsals with the European orchestra that you saw on the DVD. So I remember talking to John Anderson, going, "You want to get on a plane? I don't want to get on a plane." But we did it, and but it was in this the shadow of that event that that whole European leg of the symphonic tour took place.
What was it like playing the last shows with the SU, knowing that you would have to leave and that Wakeman would return?
Well, the aforementioned show at Radio City Music Hall was really special for a lot of reasons. That was a place where I'd gone to see if I was a kid. My parents used to take me to see the Christmas Spectacular every year there. So I knew that stage from the audience perspective. And to play it with Yes and have people I knew in the house doing it. And we had just played in New Jersey a couple nights before too. So it was a great homecoming weekend for me. And so I really relished in that experience. And then it was a little bittersweet. And then going to Europe was also bittersweet. And that last show, it's funny, I remember I do vocal warm-ups before every performance I do,
Mhm.
whether I'm a lead or a backing vocalist. And I remember like before the final show, I was in my dressing room doing my vocal warm-ups, and our monitor sound engineer came by and he said, "Wow, even the last show, you're gonna do this. You're not just gonna kick back." And I was like, "I want to go out in style. I want to do my best and just leave it all out on stage." And it was bittersweet.
What did you do musically after Yes?
I went right back into that spiraling album, and I was financing it and producing it, and we had already recorded most of our tracks for that album.
Mm-hmm.
So we started mixing, or I started mixing, because the guys in the band had been involved in other projects too, because I was just out with Yes
Yeah.
for half a year. And so I was like, well, let me focus on mixing this album. And used to be, if you were an independent band and you had a very limited budget, mixing the album, going to the studio and having them put all your tracks together into a listenable format, usually wasn't a lot of money
Hmm.
left over for that, and you would have to do it in a short order. But for those who are watching this right now who are into music recording, this was at sort of the dawn of the Pro Tools era, which is like, whereas you could do all of your mixing in the computer, and if you didn't finish, you could save it and then come back another time or and make changes, and you could just keep working on it, and every little finer detail to your liking if you just kept paying paying the studio time and the engineer. So it took me several months to mix this album because I finally had this ability to get it exactly as I wanted. And later in 2002, that album came out. It was called Transmitter by Spiraling. But that was the main thing that I did. I just went back to get back to it with my own band.
What was it like to get the call from Yes again to participate in the 50th anniversary show?
The fans had a lot to do with that,
Mm,
uh, because they were going to do this sort of Yes convention prior to the show in this other area of the venue. It was almost like a Comic Con for Yes. Roger Dean was there and um, showing his artwork, and they had performances and Q&A and all merchandise and everything. So I was invited to actually play a solo set because I'd been doing solo concerts at that point. So I did a solo set. Patrick Moraz did a solo set. There was a Yes tribute band. There was like all the guys in Yes did a Q&A. So it was like this um, event during the day. And on the concert part of it, they had planned on having Trevor Horn come up and sing a song, planned on Tony Kaye coming up and playing some song in the encore as well as Patrick. But there I was. I wasn't originally on the agenda.
yeah.
But Tony Kaye, who I never worked with, but was this class guy all around, and I really always admired his keyboard contributions to the early Yes and the 80s Yes.
Mhm.
He was the one that says, "You better get up there. You better be part of it." And even though there were about like 20 keyboards on stage, me and Patrick Moraz were just hanging out, hitting tambourines, during Starship Trooper. But just to be part of it and having Steve Howe introduce me to the fans again, and it being in Philadelphia, a lot of people knew who I was because
Mhm.
that was almost local for me. And that's always like a Yes stronghold too.
Yeah. What was it like having three of the other Yes keyboardists there? Tony Kaye, Patrick Moraz, Jeff Downs.
Awesome. And I've always had good rapport with all of them. Each of them has influenced me along my musical journey in different ways. I was again, Asia came out when I was around 9 or 10 years old, and it was like all over the radio and MTV, and it was years later that I learned of his Yes involvement.
Mhm.
And Patrick was like sort of the hidden gem in a way. I discovered Relayer when I was a teenager, and this was the hardcore Yes.
Yeah.
Wasn't the hit song Yes, and I was getting into jazz fusion too, so he was speaking my language, and Patrick is a friend and a
Mhm.
tremendous musician and an influence on me. So I loved it.
Do you also admire his work before and after? Yes, Refugee, Main Horse, stuff like that.
Yeah, I actually heard Refugee on a pretty mainstream popular New York classic rock station.
Yeah.
I think it was on one of these like Saturday night shows where the DJ had some leeway. This is back in the 90s. I remember hearing it going, "What is this? It sounds kind of like ELP," but I knew it had
Yeah.
this Mrazzness to it. And so I got into Refugee and his solo work, and little did I know that I was also hearing him with the Moody Blues for all
Yeah.
these years. So yeah, that was a cool full circle moment.
And now tell us, when did you get the call to join Kansas, and what was that like?
This is in, I would say, September of 2018. I I was actually preparing a group of my own, which was originally called Tom Brislin and Friends. Eventually, we called it Gold Rotation, and we were preparing to do a show at the Prague Stock Festival in New Jersey. And these were made up of musicians who I've worked with and friends of mine, people I admire, including Randy McStein, who's with Steven Wilson now on guitar, Dan McGowan, who is a bandmate of mine in Kansas now, and a couple percussionists, Dave Anthony and Raj Sharma, who I've worked with since forever, literally since I was a teenager. And we were mostly playing songs from my solo work, but I also had Michael Sadler from Saga sit in with us, and I was my head was totally immersed in that project. And I got a call from Phil Ehart saying, I'm Phil from Kansas and would like you to join the band. And I was blown away. I was kind of like gobsmacked because I was not expecting that phone call. Um, Post Yes, I had been getting calls from various prog rock bands over the years. I did a short tour with Camel. I played with Renaissance, The Sin. I mean, it was like that Yes lineage had trickled down to these other prog groups over the years, and the Meatloaf experience led to other pop type experiences like playing with Debbie Harry and the like. So getting a call for Kansas was unexpected. But I was also on their label with a group called See Within. It was more of a started as a recording project, and we had just done one concert at that point. But we were on their, label, so I had known that Kansas was actively making new music
Mhm.
on Inside Out Records, and so getting the call was like it was pretty awesome. And I remember asking Phil about new music and being a part of the band because that was something that wasn't available to me playing with Yes or Meatloaf or these other groups that I worked with. It was always, here's this show and we just have to play it. Whereas this was like, we want to hear what you're writing because we're working on a new album. So that really put it over the top for me.
And what would you say has kept you in Kansas these years?
It's a great band, great guys. I really enjoy playing the music. They've been good to me. And like I said, they put trust in me in naming me musical director and um, welcoming my creativity into the band. It's it's just been a really good situation, and also the fact that the way we tour is such where we get to be home almost every week, and then we go on the road. So it's like the best of both worlds. So I'm having a great time, and with this new chapter, we're just we're just trucking through.
Yeah. I feel like that's a good spot to end it, Tom. The last word is yours.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. Yeah, and for everyone listening, thanks for following me in my various musical adventures over the years, and I thank you for supporting me and supporting what we're doing now with Kansas.
Yeah. Tom, thank you for your time. See ya.
You got it. Thanks.